Hi guys, so I'm back with another chapter for class 7 and the name of the chapter is Kingdom Classification. It's for bio. Before we get into the chapter, let's understand the concept of classification. Okay, so the very first thing that we need to understand is what is classification. It means to sort or categorize things into groups. Okay, basically what we're doing is we're taking a group of things, okay, which has got similar properties, and we're going to group it together. Like for example, furniture. Okay, when we talk about furniture, furniture is a word given to a group of object, right? So similarly, even when it comes to other things like students is a word given to group of children who study at a school, at an institute or university, anywhere, but it's a group of learners. So we need to categorize things into groups so that we can identify what its properties are, right? And based on the properties of the objects, we classify them into groups. It goes hand in hand. Okay, like I said, when I talk about furniture, when I say furniture, you know exactly what it is. Okay, when I say furniture, you're not going to think about grass or trees, right? If I say animals, you know exactly what it is. You're not thinking of a chair with 4 legs or a desk. If I say plants, you know exactly what you're thinking about. You're not thinking about cats and dogs, right? So based on the category that we have classified the objects into, or the things into, we know its properties. We know what they are, right? So it becomes much more easier for us to understand what things are. Okay, so since we understood classification, let's delve deeper into the kingdom classification. And before we get there, there's another important thing that we need to do, and another important thing that we need to know, that is biological classification. Let's look at the definition. Classifying living organisms into different groups and subgroups based on similarities in their characteristics is called biological classification. Now, what it's trying to say is, imagine there are a group of animals which live underwater, right? So all these animals which live underwater, we know exactly what they are, and we give them a term. We call them fish or aquatic animals, right? All these green colored things all over us, living organisms, which are stationary, which stay in one spot, goes through the process of photosynthesis. We call them plants, right? So we know these things based on their similarities. Biological classification helps us understand that. Next, we move on to advantages of classification. Some of them I've already discussed, some of them I have not, so let's look at them. Okay, the first advantage is classification makes it easy to identify and study living organisms on Earth. We talked about this. Classification helps in identifying a new organism and placing it in a particular group. Now imagine you find a new species of animal, okay, and you study it. It has got wings, okay, it has got feathers, it has got scaly legs, it has got a beak. It's a new species. What are you going to name it as? Are you going to name it as an aquatic animal? No, you're not. Are you going to name it as a mammal? No. Reptile? No. Birds? Yes. So based on their characteristics, we can identify, okay, this is a bird, so this is here. Since it's a bird, it will have similar property to other birds. Let's check it. It has feathers? Yes. The other birds have feathers. It has scaly legs? Yes, it has. It has talons? Yes, it has. Beaks? Flies? Yeah. So, classification helps us in this. Okay? Now, the third point, it helps in getting an overview of the characteristics of a particular group of organisms so that one does not need to memorize the characteristics of each type of organisms in that group. What he's trying to say is, like I discussed before, we know birds. Okay, what are the characteristics of birds? General characteristics of birds. Yeah, there can be exceptions, like for example, when we talk about birds, I said flying, right? Flying was part of the bird's thing. Now, chicken doesn't fly, but it has got feathers, it has got wings, it has got scaly legs, it has got beaks, it has got talons, everything's there. Nice. But penguin doesn't have feathers, but it's got flippers, it looks like wings, it has got talons, it has got beak. So, yeah, everything may not match, okay, because there might be exceptions, but on the overall, generally it gives us an idea of every other species under that group. Okay, when I talk about bird, we know exactly everything about all the birds. Okay, these are the things it's going to have. Colors may vary, size may vary, and there might be some extra unique features that they have, others don't. That makes it unique. Okay? Now, when we talk about fish, again, similar thing. Mammals, similar things. Reptiles, again, similar things. Okay? So, we don't have to memorize each and every bird. Okay? We don't have to memorize what is the difference between chamangfo and sumangfo. We don't need to know the difference between a crow and a kite. We don't need to know the difference between a sparrow and a woodpecker. Why? We don't need to know each and everything if we know generally. Yeah, when you go and study deeper about these things, like for example, if you get into herpetology and you want to study more about snakes, then yeah, obviously you'll study about each different kind of snakes. But generally speaking, right now what you need to know is there are different kinds of groups of animals, and these are the basic general properties of these animals. Okay, so this classification helps us with that. Next one is, it gives a clear idea about the evolution of organisms from simple forms to more complex ones. And the last one, it establishes the relationship between different living things. This, I just talked about it. Based on the evolution, right, we understood that reptiles evolved from amphibians. So, I also talked about how reptiles will have some characteristics which are similar to the amphibians. Okay, so this connection between two different groups of animals can be made and can be easily understood, or explained because of classification. Okay, and these are the advantages of classification. So let me just read through it all over again. Classification makes it easy to identify and study living organisms on Earth. Classification helps in identifying a new organism and placing it in a particular group. It helps in getting an overview of the characteristics of a particular group of organisms so that one does not need to memorize the characteristics of each type of organism in that group. It gives a clear idea about the evolution of organisms from simple forms to more complex ones. It establishes the relationship between different living things. So we finished the advantages. Let's move on. Now we'll move on to different kind of different systems of classification. Okay, when people started, coming up with systems for classification, there were a lot of discussions, there were a lot of studies, and a lot of papers were written, a lot of thinking, a lot of process went through. So initially we had this two-kingdom classification. Okay. Now this two-kingdom classification has evolved more because the studies and researchers have been much more focused. Right? So because of that, we have more kingdoms now. But initially we had this two-kingdom classification. Okay, and the two kingdoms were Kingdom Plantae and Kingdom Animalia. Okay, from the name itself, Plantae comes from the word plant, Animalia comes from the word animal, right? So you can just relate to it. I'm not going to go into the origin of the words, where it, it came from Greek word, or I don't want to go in there, but Plantae and Animalia is very easy to understand. Why? Because it sounds similar to plant, Plantae sounds similar to plant, Animalia sounds similar to animals, and they talk about the same thing. In the previous chapter, we talked about heterotrophs and autotrophs, right? So, Plantae are basically your autotrophs, organisms which create their own food, okay? And they're stationary, like plants. They're stationary, they don't go around, they don't roam around. Have you ever seen a plant running around in the ground with its legs going like woo and running around? No, obviously you will not. Why? Because plants, they are stationary. They stand there grounded, taking in the minerals, soaking in the sun, going through the process of photosynthesis, and giving us carbon dioxide. Sorry, giving us oxygen. Taking our carbon dioxide and giving us oxygen. So, let's look at Kingdom Plantae. It includes organisms that prepare their own food but are stationary, but are at rest. They don't move from where they are. We talked about this. So from that, we can understand Animalia, Kingdom Animalia are organisms basically which do not make their own food, rely on autotrophs for their food, and they move around. Basically, they are heterotrophs who move around. Right? So, let's look at the definition. It includes organisms that cannot prepare their own food, we discussed, but can move around. Again, we discussed. Now, that was the two-kingdom classification. After that came the five-kingdom classification. In the five-kingdom classification, we already had Kingdom Plantae and Kingdom Animalia. I'm not going to talk about that because I've just talked about that. So we had that too, and then we had three more. Okay? So Kingdom Monera and Kingdom Protista are basically single-cellular organisms. Kingdom Monera, but the only difference between them is, even though they are single-cellular organisms, Monera does not have a defined nucleus. Okay? Protista has a defined nucleus. Bacteria like Vibrio and Spirilla fall under Monera. So these things, they don't have a nucleus. Protista, on the other hand, has a nucleus, and their genetic code is in the nucleus. In Monera, the genetic code is in the body somewhere. Okay? But in Protista, it's there in the nucleus. Examples of Protista would be amoeba and paramecia. Okay? These are the single cellular organisms. Now fungi are your multicellular organisms except yeast. Yeast is unicellular, but apart from that, everything else is a multicellular organism. It is a heterotroph. It cannot make its own food. Okay, they are not green in color. They don't have chlorophyll. So what they do is they are like parasites. They live on other organisms. They grow on other organisms. Okay, mushroom is also kind of a fungi. Okay, it grows on the bodies of plants. Cool. These are the 5 kingdoms. First one is kingdom Plantae, plants, kingdom Animalia, animals, kingdom Monera, single cellular organisms without nucleus like bacteria, kingdom Protista, single cellular organisms with nucleus, with the genetic code inside the nucleus. Example like amoeba. And kingdom Fungi, your heterotrophs, multicellular organisms which grow on other plants. Okay? So we move on. Now we move on to general plan of classification. So how do we classify each and every organism? Okay, we classify them firstly based on the kingdom, which kingdom they fall into. There are 5 kingdoms, so we choose from one of the 5 kingdoms and we have. Okay, we take a species, we take an animal, and then we divide it into 5 different kingdoms. Then after dividing that into kingdoms, like let's say we divide it into plants, then we move on to phylum. Okay, in phylum, plants can be divided into more groups. Okay, phylum are subgroups of kingdoms. So there are more other groups. Like for example, plants are divided into flowering and non-flowering. Okay, so first we go to kingdom, then we write the phylum, then we divide the class. Okay, like for example, animals that give birth to young ones, okay, and suckle them with milk are grouped under the class of mammals. Okay, now in plants, flowering plants are divided into 2 classes, monodicots and monocotyledons and dicotyledons. Okay, based on the number of cotyledons they have. If they have got 2, then it's dicotyledons. If they have got 1 cotyledon, it is monocotyledon. Based on the cotyledons, it is divided into 2 different classes. Okay, after the class comes your order. Okay, it's divided based on whether, like let's say in animals, the orders are basically if an animal is a herbivore or a carnivore. Okay, based on the food you take it. Okay, it doesn't have to be based on the food, but it is divided as herbivores or carnivores. After that comes familia or family. Okay, like for example, cats are grouped under the family Felidae. Okay, plants that bear rose-like flowers are grouped under the family Rosacea. Okay, so based on the characteristics, again it is divided. After that, it is divided into genus and then species. Okay, so you just need to know the order of classification. The first one is kingdom, after that phylum, then class, then order, family, genus and species. You can read about this in your book. It's there in page number 25 and 26. You didn't just go about it. Just remember the order. It's kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus and species. Okay. To remember this, we have a mnemonic which you can use. You can use keep pots clean or family gets sick. Okay, again, keep for kingdom, pots for P, phylum, clean for C, class, or for order, family, again matches, gets for genus, sick for S for species. Okay, but if you're into SpongeBob like me, then what you can do is You can remember the same thing by this. Krabby Patties cook on fry grills, SpongeBob. Okay, you can try saying it. Okay, imagine you're Mr. Krabby and you're saying this to SpongeBob and you're like, Krabby Patties cook on fry grills, SpongeBob. You can say that. Keep saying it again and again, and you'll remember the order, that is kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. Okay, on page number 26 and 27, you'll find scientific names of animals and plants. There are 2 animals, one being a tiger, other one being us humans, and then 2 plants. You can go through them and please copy them to your notebook. Okay, and please draw this in your notebook. Not this, don't draw this. You don't draw SpongeBob, but draw your order of classification. And thank you for watching the video.